this session, it's about hunger, resilience, and recovery in the food system here in New York. And I'm extremely happy to have here as our moderator, Nevin Cohen, who's Associate Professor of Health and Urban Food Policy at the CUNY School of Public Health. And he's also a faculty fellow of the New York City Food Policy Center at Hunter College. And we were lucky enough to have him as our colleague for a few years. So we worked together on many projects. It's great to have him back even for a day. He works on urban food systems, social justice, the use of urban space for food production, and he's working on very interesting books, and I'm looking forward to reading them. One is called Beyond the Kale, Urban Agriculture and Social Justice Activism in New York City. That will come out with the University of Georgia Press. And he also co-authored a study to support and strengthen New York City's urban agricultural system called Five Borough Farm, Seeding the Future of Urban Agriculture in New York City. So thank you, Nevin, and Nevin will introduce the speakers for this panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Fabio, and thank you for coming. Good morning, everybody. This is a very serious topic, but we want to keep our discussion lively, and so we don't have formal presentations for each of us. We'd rather have a discussion amongst us. I'd like to introduce the panel right now. To my left is Michael Ottley, who's the Director of Operations for the Holy Apostles Soup Kitchen in Manhattan. It's the second largest soup kitchen in the country. And Mr. Ottley adapted his kitchen to respond to the needs of Hurricane Sandy without much outside support. Kate Mackenzie is sitting to his left, and she is the Policy and Government Relations Director at City Harvest, a food rescue nonprofit organization that is focused on combating hunger in New York City. And Kate worked on coordinated food responses to those most affected by Hurricane Sandy. And then to her left is Rozanne Gold, an award-winning chef, writer, and media presence. After Hurricane Sandy, Ms. Gold created a pop-up kitchen in Brooklyn which prepared and delivered something like 185,000 meals to those in need. And so we have a very, very interesting set of presenters. The goal of this panel, and I'll just take a few minutes to sort of set the stage. The goal of this panel is to talk about the kinds of vulnerabilities we face in our food system and how we might increase its resilience in a future faced with a rapidly changing climate. So we know already that many New Yorkers are food insecure and very vulnerable. 2 million of us rely on food stamps to put food on the table. About 1 in 6 New Yorkers are food insecure overall, but 1 in 4 children are in food insecure households. And so at the moment, people are extremely vulnerable to day-to-day existence. And with climate change increasing those vulnerabilities, we have to think about how to respond. The conventional focus of planners and policymakers has been on the hard infrastructure, the roads, bridges, coastlines, and critical infrastructure like our power grid that we depend on for the city to function. And this is certainly important in a city like New York because our food system depends on concentrated distribution channels and legacy infrastructures that are really prone to climate-related failures. After Hurricane Sandy, the city wrote a report called Plan YC, A Stronger, More Resilient New York, that looked at vulnerabilities in different systems throughout the city. And for food, it's really kind of astounding. Nearly 95% of the almost 6 million tons of food that enter the city each day is transported by truck, mostly over the George Washington Bridge. Right? So a critical bottleneck in the infrastructure is the George Washington Bridge. About 60% of the city's produce and half its meat and fish pass through Hunts Point, the largest food distribution center in North America, located in the South Bronx, a neighborhood that's already food insecure and very vulnerable. But a third of the Hunts Point market is within the 100-year floodplain, and by the end of the century, we're likely to experience 100-year floods every decade or two. And we were just very fortunate that during Sandy, The tides were such that the market didn't flood, but it probably would have if they were different, if the storm hit at a different moment. As we all know, vulnerabilities are unevenly distributed, so they put the most economically vulnerable New Yorkers at the greatest risk. So 700 food markets are in a 100-year floodplain, but they're mostly smaller stores serving low-income neighborhoods with limited food retailers. 4 communities are especially prone to flooding, and they're among our most vulnerable: Coney Island, the Rockaways, Throgsneck, Co-op City, and East Harlem. And projections are that they'll have 75% of their food retail floor area in a floodplain by the 2050s. And when a fifth of the population of the city relies on SNAP, telecommunication failures that result from the grid going down mean that people who may have been counting on spending their SNAP allocation to fill up their cupboards are out of luck if the power goes down and they can't use their EBT cards. And when public transit fails, they can't even get to other neighborhoods to do their shopping. And so these are the hard infrastructure challenges, but today we want to focus on the soft vulnerabilities that come from uneven development that leaves many people with empty or near empty plates on a regular basis. And these soft vulnerabilities include lost wages, hunger and mental illnesses that occur in the aftermath of a storm that affect people socially, economically, and politically marginalized much more than those with cohesive family and social networks and with the financial wherewithal to figure out how to respond and rebound. Vulnerable populations are also affected by the types of adaptation and mitigation responses we put in place. These may include building codes that try to fortify buildings at the coastline and around New York City, but that make housing more expensive and lead to displacement, or decisions to use green infrastructure to sop up stormwater, creating new green spaces that also inadvertently raise property values and gentrify the neighborhoods that are being greened. It may even be things like the Fresh Initiative, food retail to support health, increasing food access by attracting supermarkets to low-income neighborhoods, which may in fact, paradoxically, increase vulnerability over the long run by perpetuating reliance on a small number of established supply chains rather than other forms of food retail like co-ops, small grocers, farmers markets, which may have the added value of supporting neighborhood development. And so I'd like to turn to our panelists to think about these hard food infrastructures and also the soft infrastructure of social networks, organizational capacity, and support services that they're involved in on a day-to-day basis, and how resilient a community can be in a food crisis. What's the role of reducing inequities and empowering people in vulnerable communities? And how can we move beyond the focus on fortifying the shorelines and making sure the emergency food system is robust to also address the underlying structures that have enabled the crisis of the empty plate to worsen in our city, not end? And so with that introduction, I'd like to turn to Rozanne Gold, who will give us a vignette from her experience during Hurricane Sandy.
Thank you so much, Nevin. Can everyone hear me? I'm going to tell you a little story about what happened to me the night after Hurricane Sandy. Just after midnight, the day after Hurricane Sandy, our rabbi, Andy Bachman, sent an email to everyone he knew. He and Brooklyn Councilman Brad Lander were looking for a way to feed several hundred people at the local armory for just a few days. These were mostly the poor souls who had been evacuated from the city's nursing homes. Some were old, some were sick, and others were in need of kosher-style food. At 8:20 a.m., I woke my husband and said, "I think we need to do something." We had no money, no food, and no plan. But we got dressed, went to Key Food, and got to work. When we arrived at the shul, there were platoons of volunteers waiting. Within several hours, together we made 600 sandwiches. The next day, we made 1,000. Everyone wanted to do something. We had few pots, pans, or utensils, but we managed. In fact, we asked everyone in the community to bring 1 dozen hard-boiled eggs and a loaf of bread. Surely I thought, this is something anyone can do. This simple ask demonstrated the power of community better than anything could. Within 24 hours, we had thousands of eggs to peel for egg salad and bread to make sandwiches. Without everyone's involvement, we would not have been able to reach our goal those first few days. Cooking was one thing, but how to get to food to those in need? Many people didn't even have gas in their cars. A few volunteers came to the rescue and became the beneficent commanders who located teams of drivers to send out to the areas that were hardest hit: Coney Island, Red Hook, Canarsie, the Rockaways, Gravesend housing projects. The next day, Rabbi Bachman made another request. In addition to 2,500 sandwiches, he told us, he wanted to have 500 hot meals. My husband ran home to get his cleaver, and we bought and hacked up 150 chickens from Costco. We made mashed potatoes, steamed vegetables, sent out cookies, and fruit when we could find it. The next day, we did it again, and again, and again. We made sandwiches and cooked up whatever raw ingredients were donated to us. There were lots. The chapel was filled with potatoes, onions, and green beans, and the upstairs ballroom turned into a satellite pup tent, much like the Army. We cooked for 3,000 hungry people that first Sunday after the storm. Excuse me. Sorry. Day after day, the volunteers came, and my husband, and more volunteers, and other people's husbands and partners, and even their kids, who did the shopping and schlepping up and down the stairs all day long, every day. We operated this way for months, feeding people without homes, without kitchens, people who lived near markets that had no food. We all felt the imperative, and we rose to the occasion. Before Hurricane Sandy, I realized I never knew anyone who was hungry. Even on Yom Kippur, our day of fasting, we don't know real hunger. We may be momentarily hungry, but we do not worry about going hungry. Sandy brought to our door the reality that people very close to our community grapple with hunger every day. We were able to live some of that worry, yes, with food and sandwiches, but also with spiritual nourishment, because we showed up every day and we proved that we cared. We became well known in the city as, quote, the best place to work, but that was before I met Michael at the Holy Apostles Soup Kitchen. His is the best place to work. Volunteers came from everywhere: Staten Island, Riverdale, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and from all over Manhattan. During the Christmas holidays, there were people working with us from California and Washington State, from Israel, and from France. In the beginning, Anne Hathaway heard about our efforts and became involved and gave us $25,000. So did Natan Sharansky. He knew how much we had helped the Russian community in Brighton Beach and Manhattan Beach. In fact, he said everywhere he went, he heard the words, CBE feeds. I'm going to stop here and just let you know that 185,000 meals were prepared and delivered, and we just got a couple $100,000 from the state government to continue. Thank you.
So, Michael, I wonder, thinking about that kind of experience, does the Holy Apostle Soup Kitchen engage people from the Chelsea community in helping to prepare meals? And
we've been around for 32 years, and similar to Rozanne's story, after Sandy, we were caught flat-footed, and people still showed up that next day, and we were ill-prepared. We had no power, we had no nothing, but our volunteers who have come to us for day in and day out for those years showed up, and we got together and we started preparing sandwiches because that's all we had. Of course, we have a storeroom full of food, and we weren't flooded, and we had people that just showed up and were eager to help. And that day we prepared as many sandwiches as we had food for, and we started to reach out, and we reached out into the community, and people were driving up and dropping off sandwiches, and as the days went on without power, more sandwiches came, and we would continue for the entire week, and luckily the power came on at the end of the week, and we're back in business full force. But, you know, it's amazing what communities do in times of crisis. And you talk about resiliency, and that's when resiliency really comes to the forefront, is during crisis or after crises. And that's been going on for generations, where people just in communities come together and help people in need. And, you know, we're surrounded in Chelsea by, you know, the Elliott Houses and, you know, Penn South, which is the largest natural occurring retirement community in the country, I believe, at this point. And all these people needed food and something, and, you know, all people from all outer boroughs came together and brought us sandwiches. And, you know, it's a good to see, and it's not unlike Rozanne's story, and, you know, it's just was amazing.
Thanks. And Kate, I wonder if you could help us think about what the emergency feeding programs and institutions in the city can do to sort of move beyond the heroic work that they've done in crisis to a more sustainable
Thanks.
system.
It's a really interesting question, and I remember in the throes of Hurricane Sandy, working with the city and what we call pop-ups that occurred, you know, for the first time, you know, just operations like Rozanne is mentioning. And it came to a point, I would say in probably January, where in concert with the American Red Cross, with the city's Office of Emergency Management, really kind of faced with this, what seemed very callous at the time, but sort of decision that we at City Harvest should stop supplying the pop-ups to allow stores to come back to life. And so it was an interesting dynamic of thinking about the moment of disaster recovery, and then moving beyond that to trying to get back to a sense of normalcy in as much as one could after devastation like that. And underscoring that if we continue to, I remember having a moment of wow, because throughout all of the food work being done to feed people throughout Hurricane Sandy, we were in a sense creating another emergency food system. And there were so many people that we became incredibly friendly with. You know, again, these stories are, I'm taken back to that time and hearing that vignette, and people feeling they needed to do something, they needed to help, but not understanding that they had to pull back in order to let the communities start to come back to life. And so that was really interesting for me to think about from a place of, you know, getting, you know, letting the stores come back, because in a disaster, one of the things that I learned is that a true sign of recovery is that the businesses come back to life. And if we're preventing that from happening, there's going to be no sense of long-term recovery. And I will also say that in, I don't know, probably it took a good month for sort of a system to start to take shape that City Harvest as a nonprofit partner, the city agencies involved and all of the various players. It took a while to get off our you know, to start working on this. But the obvious kind of response from the city to me at City Harvest was, well, emergency food providers, which is the sort of formal name for places like Holy Apostles Soup Kitchen, emergency food providers should step up to the plate. We're in an emergency, isn't that what they're for? And sort of there was a failure to recognize that in New York City, in the country, particularly, what was that, 2012, we were in the midst of really, we were in an emergency every day. There was not enough food to feed the number of hungry people and families and children that needed food in the best of times, let alone when a hurricane strikes. So kind of an aha moment for the city to recognize that not only can our emergency food programs not equipped to respond in an emergency, broadly speaking. Of course, some definitely rose to the occasion, but that's not their that's not their main purpose. It's to feed people every day, and recognizing that particularly in the areas most impacted, they're underserved, if we can think about that, when it comes to emergency food providers. So it was really a challenge to think about, some provocative questions about, do we need more emergency food programs? I mean, isn't it the idea that if we are living in a true resilient city, shouldn't have to depend on soup kitchens and food pantries? There should be none ever. But that's not going to happen for a very long time. So my organization and many others try and make sure that they're as fortified with food and resources and staff and volunteers as they possibly can be. But in times of disaster, how really do we feed? But more so thinking, I encourage us to think about, the disaster relief and it's our strategy to feed the city in times of natural disaster as perhaps parallel, but not confuse it with our plan to be resilient as a food system in New York City.
Wonderful. I think it was really striking to hear Michael talk about Hurricane Sandy and his efforts, because Michael feeds 1,000 people every single day at the Holy Apostles Soup Kitchen. I just went to see it once. It's the most beautiful dining room of any institution in New York, including the Rainbow Room. He has a wonderful program called Farm to Tray. His food is healthy, nutritious. It's just this amazing system of volunteers, and I think you have a piano player. They teach some of the guest writing skills, and it's just an amazing place to see. My question is, whose aegis does that fall under? Because my little soup kitchen doesn't fall under anyone's, and that's also part of the problem. We're not part of anything bigger than ourselves. And when we got started, we broke every rule in the book. We did not care, because we really didn't have the capability of caring about the most up-to-date sanitation. We didn't really have the certificates that we needed. We didn't have, well, we certainly didn't really need too much refrigeration, right? It was getting kind of cool then, but every rule was broken. We would not pass any certification standards whatsoever because we were operating in a crisis. And I think the point is, when it's no longer a crisis, what happens? Who takes over? This money that we're going to get is going to bring us up to code, but I believe that we're going to have to change the way we operate now, too.
Michael, how long has Holy Apostles Soup Kitchen been in
Well,
operation? Do you envision ever going out of business, actually, as a soup kitchen?
Before we sat down, I was talking to Rozanne earlier, and I said, it's amazing. Every day I go to work, and what was supposed to be a temporary solution to what we thought at the time, 32 years ago, going on 33 years ago, and to a temporary solution to a temporary problem. It is amazing that we're still doing it 32 years later, and the numbers don't go down, and the people continue to come, and the dynamics of who we see and the people that come and need our services continues to grow, and it's a sad thing that in one of the most powerful countries in the world that we continue to do that, and just before the panel started, we talked that it's amazing that Food Bank of New York and City Harvest, we're all about the same age. We all have about the same birthdays, and it was all out of she told me it all came because of all the cuts that was made back in 32 years ago by government or whoever, and I don't foresee. I wish that I could sit here and say, yeah, we're going to go out of business tomorrow. That would be the solution, but I don't see that as happening. I mean, I think there would be. I think we would need cooperation between a lot of different people, government, communities, private and public sectors, urban gardens.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
a lot of
think
things.
it's also, to underscore that, we're talking about the issue of hunger and hungry people, and really out of recognition, I think the kind of social networks, Nevin, that you're, sort of the social infrastructure, food alone isn't going to solve hunger. And so we can, ensure that we have as much, but it's important right now because that's not going to, there's an immediate need, an acute sort of crisis for people tonight. And so my organization and the others here will make sure that people are fed, but food is not going to solve hunger. And, when the cuts that Mike were referring to happened in the early 80s, we're mirroring that very much so right now. And so thinking about what is going to happen, you mentioned 2 million people are on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or food stamps. That number will ultimately go down a little bit, but that's a real struggle, and that's income support to provide food for people. But, and also thinking, again, from a resiliency standpoint, if we are getting what's going to happen to this food supply that is giving food to organizations like City Harvest and Holy Apostles, what's going to happen when California no longer has enough groundwater to supply for the production that we're used to. And so that's something that I think it's important for, and new and different for an emergency food system to start to think about is what's going to happen when there just isn't enough food to continue to supply us in the levels that we're used to.
At the prices we're
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, Michael, does Holy Apostle Soup Kitchen also run programs to help people get back on their feet and support their family's infrastructure beyond?
Well, we do more than just food. We have a whole social service program that we offer referrals. We don't have a program where we don't have caseworkers or things like that, but we point them to the right agencies where they can get onto food stamps and get onto Medicaid. We offer medical assistance. The van pulls up every week, and we offer them that, and we offer them if they need detox services or whatever they need. So, we try to work on the whole person. Rozanne mentioned that we have a computer training class. We have a vibrant music program where we're homeless or people can come in and play. We have a beautiful organ and a beautiful piano, and so we're working on the whole person. But it's not a program that there's not licensed social workers there, but it's a program where we can offer services to other agencies, and we partner with a lot of agencies that come there and have tables that we can send them out into the other agencies to do that.
So is the challenge of the empty plate, the challenge of reducing income disparity in New York City and supporting people with better jobs and better wages?
Definitely a huge part of it. I think that in addition to the work of, obviously, this year we'll rescue and distribute 50 million pounds of food. Additionally, we're working out, recognizing that of the nearly 1.5 million New Yorkers that don't always know where their next meal is going to come from, they're not necessarily going to a soup kitchen or a food pantry. It might be the mom who doesn't have the ability to put dinner on her table because she's coming home from one job and running to the next one. There are many people that are really struggling that don't have to turn to kitchens and pantries. And City Harvest is working with a lot of neighborhoods across the city really in that space, the more food insecure place, not necessarily acutely hungry. And, working with, you mentioned, retail is a really exciting and challenging business function right now, whether it is making sure that there's enough stores that sell affordable, fresh produce or healthy food overall, to make sure that people in communities know that maybe a store that they never used to go into now can stock good produce, or even working with food businesses to make sure that we can help to demonstrate that there is a demand for good and healthy food, and really stressing the affordability place is important. I think it's also important to underscore too that there's a convenient way to think that just because people are poor, they have no idea what they should buy or how to cook, or it's not that. People do know what are the healthy options to buy. The chances are that's just not available to them. But I think that, yes, if we're going to lift people out of the cycle of poverty, of reliance on food supports in whatever form they take. It is about making sure that people get paid a little bit better. The other thing it would be remiss to not mention, here we are in the largest school district in the country, breakfast is free for every child, about a 25% participation in that program. So clearly more kids, it makes sense because it's a program that's offered in schools, but it's also perhaps income support to families who don't have to buy breakfast for their kids. Lunch, often is the case that particularly if you are income challenge, it's free in your school, not a lot of participation there, and it's good. It's no longer, kind of your classic lunch lady cafeteria story. It's good food, and New York is a leader in that program. So, not to get into that track, but I think that there are some resources that we can take better advantage of to make sure that kids in particular, that we kind of just glazed over it, but to stop and think for a moment, that 1 out of 4 kids in this city, 1 out of 4 kids doesn't know where their next meal is going to come from. That's embarrassing.
When we got started, again, the mandate from the councilman and the rabbi was to just feed a couple hundred people for a few days. So, 2 years later, we keep on identifying vulnerable populations that need food. And it's one thing to talk about higher wages, but most of these people are undocumented. We're very reluctant to even stand on lines for sandwiches. There's so much fear and alienation at that level. So, it's interesting to know how to actually help them in the future and even get them to a point where we can start talking about wages. I also know during the hurricane, it's one thing not to have food, but these populations also didn't have flashlights or medicine or jackets or heat. So we actually coordinated with the mayor's office to help get medical supplies to people who were stuck all the way up in their buildings or just couldn't get to the stores. So again, I'm such an outsider in a way. I'm a professional chef, and 35 years of my life has been spent feeding people in good times. So the education for me at this level over the last 2 years to figure out what's happening in the city. Also, I used to be the chef for the mayor of New York, for Ed Koch. I actually lived with Ed at Gracie Mansion. So at that point, I had my toe in the kind of political world, but really left it. And now I'm so interested to learn more about this vast spider web and how things even happen, and again, whose umbrella are we under?
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like the conversation that you've had with your rabbi and congregation has evolved, and I wonder if it's evolved to thinking about these issues of whether people have the basic income to put food in their cupboards or not.
Well, like every dysfunctional family, our rabbi is leaving, and most of the people who worked in our soup kitchen were not members of the congregation, nor were they Jewish. So that was really interesting for us too. Where were they? It was easier for them to write a check, and that was very appreciated, and that's what got everyone going and excited. But the day-to-day workers came from churches. We had a wonderful divinity group from Harvard. We became partners with New York Cares. So it was just, again, interesting to see who's around after the first jolt of crisis.
And, who are your networks? What other organizations do you work with on these issues?
It's not unlike Rozanne's. It's communities, corporations, mostly, we have a history, so we have a lot of, volunteer network that's, it's retired people who come to volunteer that, are too proud to stand in the line, so that, they'll come and volunteer, so they'll come and eat, so like I say, we live, Penn South is a huge, I don't know how many people live there, but there's a lot. And, they come and volunteer, and, we have our regular volunteers, and, we do have a paid staff. It's not a large paid staff. We serve 1,000 meals or more a day. We have 6,000 meals a week. I mean, we have basically 6 employees paid. The rest, we have about 65 volunteers a day, and all those people come from a lot of different groups, you know, schools and some corporations, seniors, like I said. So there's where our network comes from. If you're asking me what supports us financially, I mean, very little comes from government, and less is coming from government. Most of it comes from individuals through direct mail. Corporations is a sliver of it. I don't know if that's because we don't do a good job of asking, or if it's because we're sitting in the church. Could be a lot of those things. And then the rest is made up through different kinds of things. There was a lot of money after Sandy. That's sort of, I heard there's still some money coming somewhere, somehow, still from Sandy, but we haven't seen that yet. But that's how we put it together. Our program is probably a $2.9 million operation. We do get a lot of donated food. Thank you, City Harvest. We purchase a lot of food, and we get by.
You know, I want to talk about cost for a second, because another thing I had to learn was how much does it cost to make a really delicious lunch? So so both I would love to hear. So we can make a gorgeous sandwich on whole wheat bread with a freshly washed and dried leaf lettuce, with ham and cheese. Again, a no-no for the synagogue, but never mind, it was a crisis. People like ham and cheese. Sliced turkey, tuna salad, sometimes homemade chicken salad from those hacked up chickens we got at Costco. We very often sent out cut carrots and always a piece of fresh fruit, banana or apple or orange. Again, we didn't have a lot of labor and, you know, cutting things, and then you get into a packing and refrigeration problem. But we've been able to do it, including all the packing materials, no salaries from the administration, ta-da, for about $2 a lunch. Michael?
I don't want to tell you.
But-
$1.04.
What? And
When
this
I-
is farm to take.
When I arrived 7 years ago, it was $3.50.
Tell us more about that. That's
Yeah,
exciting.
the farm to trade
Well,
is
I used to get about $30,000 in donated food from City Harvest. Now I get about 250,000. A dollar is equivalent to that. I purchased another 250,000 from food. I used to purchase about $500,000 in food, so I was able to lower what I purchased because I made up through donations. I beg, borrow, and steal. You know, I call up, you know, Rachel Ray and say I need turkeys. You know, it's a big joke over at City Harvest. I'm calling my friend Meg Davison and asking her, you know, I need turkey. She says, Michael, it's only it's only Easter. I said, but put me on the list. I mean, we used to purchase those. You know, they've helped us out. It's a full-time job to purchase. I put a list together every week, you know, and I put down what I need for the week for the menu. And then I go through 3 or 4 purveyors, the broadband distributors. What I mean by that is it's Cisco and AFI and U.S. Foods or the other ones, whatever. And then I will only order from them if their book is online. Their book means what they have for sale. If it's not online, I will not talk to a salesman, you know, on the phone, so I can see the price there. And that's how I do it. I always negotiate prices, paper supply. I mean, that doesn't include paper supplies. I use trays that we can wash.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the Farm to Tray project? And because Kate mentioned the vulnerabilities of the drought in California, what role can emergency food providers play in making the regional food system more robust so that we have a greater variety of sources of food year-round?
Farm to Tray is a fundraising project for us. This is our third year. It's a major fundraiser that we have where we have chefs from New York, where the ingredients come from a 100-mile radius, where chefs come in and prepare for an evening within the soup kitchen. The name came from farm being local, tray being what we serve the guests with. And we try to get everything, Whole Foods, a big supporter of ours, donates the majority, or if not all, the food for the chefs. They come in, they prepare their food, and people have a wonderful evening. It's held May 21st in the church. It's a great evening. Rozanne was there last year and was there from the beginning to the end, and it's a great idea, but, it's about sustainability and where we've tried to move our soup kitchen. When I first arrived there, we would talk about, Holy Apostles, we give them 2,000 calories a meal. I was like, what? I'm a trained chef by trade. I went to culinary school. I said, how do you do that? Unless we put a bag of sugar on the tray, but anyways, so we looked at the menu, and now we're moving towards fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, locally sourced ingredients when we can get them. Of course, we have to be at the right price point because we are an emergency, quote unquote, I hate that word, feeding program. But I tell my staff, listen, just because the people are coming down the line and we're serving them on a tray doesn't mean that they can't have the same quality of meal and the same kind of presentation that you would get if you're going to a nice diner or a nice restaurant. And treat them with that kind of respect. So that's what Farm to Tray is all about, that we can transfer that vision onto our tray to our guests. And we call them guests. They're not clients. They're people. So that is what it's about. And it's all about sustainability. And we partner with farmers, and what we also have done at Holy Apostles is, we've partnered with farmers markets. We brought a farmers market to 23rd Street and 9th Avenue that sets up there starting in May. And they go through the summer. So we brought a farmer's market to that area. There was really not a farmer's market in that neighborhood. Penn South complained because they didn't want that in their neighborhood, but they got over it. So this is going to be their second year. And at the end of the day, I'm telling my staff, it's on a Saturday. We don't work on Saturday, but I send my staff over. We'll go collect all the things that didn't sell, so we bring them back to the soup kitchen. We cut them up for Monday. So we take all the fresh vegetables and whatever we can do, and we create a meal out of it. So that's what we do, and that's what it's about.
Kate, I wonder if you could elaborate on that. Can the emergency food system help sustain a regional food system?
Well, it's interesting. I feel like this must be my academic weekend, because tomorrow I'm going to Yale actually to talk about how the incredible amount of food waste, right, that this country produces, and amidst all of this conversation about hunger, I think I'm gonna clearly not prepared yet, but I think it's something like 40% of the food that we produce in this country is wasted, which means it does not make it from, ends up in landfills or the like. So one of the programs, and this is just, a minutia of impact there, but, in this state, we have obviously a tremendous amount of agriculture, and City Harvest makes connections with farmers that can't, and I want to kind of differentiate between the kind of farmers that would be at Union Square or something else that's really growing for for a market, so, for a farmer's market, that scale of a production, as opposed to a wholesale grower that just has hundreds, if not thousands of acres of land that they're farming. And it's that, and those farmers that are not quite the huge production scale that might, source for something like, I don't know, Green Giant or a label such as that, but those farmers that are really struggling for markets. And so if they can't find a market for their onions or potatoes or cabbage or carrots or whatever it is, they end up just plowing that under, which is a contributor to food waste. So that's pretty sucks for the farmer because they don't have, they put in all of their resources to make this food grow, and then they can't sell it. So we will provide them with something, maybe 12, 14 cents to the pound of food to get it for distribution into the emergency food system. It's something, it's not the best price that they would ever have, but also trying to work with our lovely state Senator Gillibrand to make sure that we can really draw attention to these kinds of opportunities for these wholesale growers so that they can do more with the crops that they currently don't have markets for. I will also say that I think one of the it's this almost sick kind of when there's a crisis, emergency food, anti-hunger work tends to fare very well, right? Sandy is an example. I think it was I remember being in an American Red Cross meeting, or with somebody who said Sandy is the most well-funded disaster ever. And it's really a little strange to think about that, but our challenge is to think about how we can really tell the story of going beyond feeding people tonight to donors, to foundations, to to people like this that can connect. I remember many conversations, and when you start to talk about climate, or you start to talk about sustainability or farming even, doesn't seem to be a huge jump there, that people say, well, that's not for us. We just feed people right now, and that's what we want to stick to. So the challenge and the opportunity, frankly, is to really help connect the dots that what we're eating really is dependent on the weather, really is dependent on the social fabric of communities. And it's a really hard story, but it's a story that needs to be told to ensure that places like Holy Apostles, like smaller soup kitchens and food pantries, and organizations like City Harvest can continue along the spectrum of feeding people, hopefully outside of emergency crisis situations.
And for anyone, what kinds of policies do we need to put in place to make that possible?
I wouldn't know.
Well, but see, this is another thing. I think the word policy scares people, but because it's in my title, I guess I'm de facto respondent. I think that, so thinking about tomorrow and thinking about, how do we deal with the reality of food waste in this country? I would, of course, there's a movie that's coming out, which is what I'm responding to tomorrow, called Just Eat It. And it's kind of a classic, I don't know if I should say classic, but it's a Canadian couple, seemingly more well off than not, that survives on 6 months by dumpster diving, essentially. And of course they like put on weight. They there's too much food for that they can handle. But so I think thinking about more of why does that happen in the first place. It gets into things like the sell-by dates in New York City versus use-by dates. And this culture of we're so afraid. And even I would say you mentioned how does a soup kitchen or food pantry kind of get licensed or the proper abilities to serve food. We have such a culture of fear when it comes to food safety and needing to have all kinds of protections in place. I don't know. Maybe we should start to think about, are those all necessary? Now, certainly, City Harvest is incredibly proud that we've never had an incident of food safety whatsoever. But I think that it's, thinking about policy, it's interesting to examine that as a root of possible, maybe it's causing too much food waste. And therefore, we're throwing out food more at the consumer level. Think about your own refrigerators, and what's in there and how much food we throw away that because it either says it's past date or we're not storing it properly. I think it's interesting to think about that. I would also say that, there's just I won't get into it because it's not a policy conversation, but there's a lot of policies that could be strengthened to make sure that we're feeding people better.
Well, it really brings an idea to mind, though. I don't know how you do this, but the way restaurants are now graded, with an A or B, I think most people will go into a restaurant that has a B. I'm not 100% sure. I probably would be very comfortable doing that. If there was a way to kind of classify food in that way, that this is sort of prime, the way we talk about our steaks, and this is maybe choice, B, then you have a choice then, and one comes at a higher price point, one comes at a slightly lower price point. Again, making this happen, I don't know, but theoretically it's, I think, pretty powerful. And then we open up a lot more tonnage of food. Again, I don't know how much time we have left, but this whole idea of food waste. I'm kind of a new practitioner of meditation, and no one knows really how it works or why it works, but when you meditate as a group, it seems to have wonderful, profound influence for the rest of the world. So I'm just thinking if we all brought a little bit more intention into our own kitchens and really thought about waste, not just leaving the water on, I think we're all very savvy about that now, but really, boil those asparagus peelings. They look just like fettuccine. I want to tell you if you get it just right. And fry your carrot tops and really think about waste and how you can reutilize. It really is a very creative thing to do, and it might somehow lift this whole conversation. So I think we should all do this.
Yeah, I have heard a number of sort of policy ideas come out of this discussion. So, Kate, in addition to talking about waste, you talked about school lunches, and so other institutional feeding programs can be made more robust, and ideas of allowing school districts to offer universal free lunch can increase the number of students who eat school lunch.
Hopefully New York will expand its program next year. Yep.
Connections between soup kitchens and other distribution channels like farmers markets, but potentially other markets in the community could help to diversify the food distribution system in New York City, making it a little bit less vulnerable to breakdowns during disasters. And funding seems to be a critical need, both income support for people so that they are not vulnerable in their homes and unable to procure enough food for their families, but also for organizations that are working to provide food in crisis.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts? I'd like to open the discussion up to the audience at this point. Okay. So we have a few minutes now to take questions from the audience. We have 2 microphones here, if anyone would like to speak to the panelists. Thank you.
Right now, Dan Barber is making a big deal out of food waste. Do you think that his emphasis on this, the publicity that he's getting, will that be a help to your programs? Will that be a hindrance to your programs? Will it have no effect whatsoever on your programs and on feeding the unfed who need to be fed?
That's such a great question, and this is such a complex area because many people feel that Alice Waters, obviously a pioneer in so many things, and her edible school lunch program has manifested itself in really deep ways, but some people find it very elitist. Although I think it's trickled down and has really influenced the people it really needs to and helps the people it needs to. So Dan Barber's program has a little bit of that quality. And yet at the same time, even this whole idea of intentionality and everyone becoming aware of it, and God bless him, everything he does gets a lot of attention. So there's probably a really strong message in what he's doing. So I think it's good.
I would agree that it's he's using his name and his stature to draw attention to a very real problem. I would like it if he furthered his kind of message to include the reality of hunger, because it is part of that cycle, and we don't see it as threatening at all. I mean, I'll tell you what City Harvest was founded, frankly, on the food waste, but we hate the term. I mean, it's because you think about your cucumber peels or something else, but it's food, it's consumable food that would otherwise go to waste. So if there's any marketing people in here that can figure out how to say that in a snappy way, come talk to me. But it's really, if we could just expand the kind of message about, wow, all of this food is being wasted, period, to say, and we have such a problem of hunger in this country, I feel like it could go a lot further. And yeah, I mean, we've been doing this. I mean, Eric Rapera cooks for us every week, and so do, I would say, about 40 to 50 other top line chefs, and have been doing it for 32 years.
I actually have a question for Nevin.
Yes.
Does urban agriculture play any role in these issues of resiliencies, crisis? What do you think about that?
That's a great question, because we have tended to think about urban agriculture, community gardens, and urban farms as potentially feeding the city. There isn't the physical space in the city for urban agriculture to do that, but what urban agriculture can do is help communities organize around the issue of food and hunger. Many community gardens and urban farms are connected to food pantries and other feeding programs, and are providing those facilities with fresh food. The quantity isn't the issue, but the fact that there is a connection in the community between those able to produce food and those who need food is helping to create networks of people who can be resilient in crisis. So through churches, through grassroots organizations, the farms and gardens serve as a place to come together, to sometimes organize around policy issues like housing, income disparities, and other social problems. And so urban agriculture plays that role in helping to make communities resilient, not by feeding them, but by actually helping them to organize around food.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you all so much. And that $1.04 will really stick with me. And I think it's remarkable. And I think we're in a city where you can easily pay 100 times that for a meal. And I would like to invite you to help me understand that and think, if that $100 meal, what the correspondence between that $100 meal and that $1 meal might be. If you know of any partnerships, you said food won't cure hunger. So it seems like some bridges might help alleviate it in some ways. And I wonder if you know of any successful partnerships between, for lack of a better term, haves and have-nots that are addressing this. I'm thinking of groups like Make the Road by Walking and things like that. To what extent are they involved in hunger relief, and are there collaborations that address this?
Specifically with Make the Road?
No, that's just one example. Again, I'm asking, the bigger question is between, the haves and have-nots.
This is it's a big question, and unfortunately gets to be pretty partisan. So I'm going to stop there. But no, I mean, really, it's easy to talk about food because it's completely bipartisan. But when you start talking about income, you really start to polarize people and people's opinions. So it does seem like it would be common sense that we could all talk the same language, but it really then becomes lines drawn in the sand. We don't talk about that. We can't go there.
There are groups like Brooklyn Rescue Mission is a food pantry, soup kitchen, and they have a community farm. And recognizing that the lack of income is really the reason why people have to use those services. The group engages people in discussions about the politics around income disparity in New York City, and also tries to support people who are trying to start businesses in Bed-Stuy. Other groups, like La Finca del Sur in the South Bronx, another community farm, is about women empowerment, and the goal of the organization is to create a safe space for women to think about issues of income disparity and ways for women in the South Bronx to either start their own businesses or otherwise get into higher quality jobs. And so I think I agree with you that when you talk about food, lots of people can come to the table and have a discussion about all sorts of things from taste to provenance. But when you talk about the underlying problems of social disparities and the cause of hunger in a city like New York, it becomes politically sensitive. But there are organizations that are really struggling to have that political conversation. And this mayoral administration has opened the door to conversations about income inequality. And so we have an opportunity now, I think, to try to figure out how do we actually ensure that in a city as rich as New York, the quantity of people requiring emergency food and food support decreases, and how organizations can actually have more support than they do, so that they don't have to actually worry about feeding people on $1 a meal.
It's interesting because we've never actually been able to experience this, but I would bet that if we suddenly saw the rates of hunger decreasing, right, and wanted to make that a headline, the donations for our organizations would go down.
And if we add into that the racial disparity in
Right.
people who don't have access to food, that would make the conversation a lot more controversial
Yes.
for your donors.
Yes, yes.
Next question.
Hi. Speaking to everything that all of you are speaking to about socioeconomic stance, and that correlation between sustainability and having available resources and feeding the hungry, I was wondering if either there is some sort of relationship to all of this, to the awareness that the population might have of these sources. We talk about how much wealth in food and resource and networks we have in New York City, yet there is still this huge disparity within, just feeding everyone. And sorry, I'm not articulating myself very well, but do you think that maybe by increasing marketing or tools such as that to reach your demographic, do you think that then we'll be able to optimize on these resources? I think that people aren't even aware that these services exist. And those who do maybe might not necessarily need it as much as those who aren't aware of that. Is there any way to break through that? Speaking to Michael, I'm sure that your services started from not just because it's been available for 32 years, but from the resilience within a community and from word of mouth, and not just through galas and campaigns. Can anyone speak to that? No.
Well, I think that it's interesting too, the affiliation or grounding that the faith-based networks have in soup kitchens and food pantries, and across denominations. And so not saying that if you're connected to one of the, I think it's an interesting point to think about, who are we not reaching, the collective we not reaching, that we need to be reaching. And I think that there are, significant types of research and real localized demographics and kind of, not studies, but, counts and being done in communities to know where are the pockets, like we're involved in this right now with the Helmsley Foundation, actually, about where are there pockets of need in the city that are underserved by emergency food. It's a really hard analysis to do. Thankfully, they're there to help do it. But, and particularly looking at some of the groups, particularly in immigrant populations where we may not know, where certain, groups are, and really finding the grassroots organizations that can make those connections to places like City Harvest. The Coalition Against Hunger in New York is a great resource that really does try and spread the word about here's a list, here are kitchens and pantries that you can go to. So it's interesting to think about, for sure.
I mean, the reality is most of the people that we might be addressing either don't realize that they either need that assistance. You were talking about the fact that there are these food programs in schools and students don't take advantage of them. And we had also stated that 1 out of 4 children don't even know where they're going to get their next meal. So is it that maybe then we can see that either students are not going to school or people aren't aware of this?
The answer to that is actually more about stigma associated with the program itself, or
Yes.
school rules that don't require kids to stay on campus for meals. There's a lot of rationale for that lack of participation, and we're slowly trying to chip away at that. But yeah, I think that particularly for kids, schools are the captive. Kids have to go to schools, right? There's at least 2 meals a day served there, so it's one of the first lines of defense for kids and hunger or food insecurity, for sure.
Do you think that by removing that stigma, sorry, I keep riffing, but do you think by removing that stigma from, whether it's terms as food waste or food programs, which are just euphemisms for maybe a greater cause, do you think that that will encourage people to go for those resources?
It's been shown in other cities and states that where they have reduced certain barriers, like making food free for all, so you don't have to say, oh, well, you're just, because you're poor, you're eating that. It does dramatically increase participation. Yeah.
And even in programs like food pantries, there are many, many food pantries that are organized like a supermarket. So the clients are treated as every other person. And those programs also have support so that people can both access public benefits that they're entitled to and also find ways to actually reduce their reliance on the food pantry.
Again, this is my last one, sorry. Do you think that by, in the battle
Just a second, are there
Sorry.
other questions before?
Sorry.
Go. Okay, real quick. Because
Last one. Okay. In the challenge to combat, let's say, food waste, and I forgot who had mentioned it, maybe redefining the policies on how food is stored and how it's defined, what food waste actually is. Do you think that that'll directly affect, consumerist market by showing that, oh, well, technically you can have that, box of cereal 2 months later than the expiration date. Oh, you can actually eat that can of soup, a year later. Do you think that's the reason why this hasn't really emerged or evolved?
It is emerging and evolving, and so people are actually working to change the regulations around food so that consumers aren't misled by overly restrictive information at the supermarket. But I think the overall point around food waste is that it's the empty plate is not the result of too little food available. In fact, we're producing worldwide enough food to feed the planet. It's just not distributed equitably. And so the question really is both to reduce the actual food waste, but also to change the distribution of food so that people have full plates to eat. And I think, are there any other questions?
As all of you are very well aware, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of special events every week in New York with an enormous amount of food left over, whether it's fundraisers or restaurants or events. And one of the problems is from the event planners that are responsible for these events when they are over and left with tons and tons and tons of food, that the litigation or the possibility of litigation from somebody getting ill from receiving these creates the dilemma. What do we do with it? Do we dump it and feel bad? Or do we find a resource that will accept it? And I think City Harvest and the Bowery are two programs that have become kind of popular in accepting donations from special events. However, there's very few people that are aware of these organizations, and they must have that food delivered to them under certain guidelines and restrictions that we, for the most part, are not familiar with. So, and someone else has talked about the marketing efforts. If the organizations that will accept food from all of these events will, through social media, let the PR side of the organizations that are putting on these events know who will accept it, how they will accept it, how we need, for the PR side, how do we notify you or ask you whether or not it's appropriate on Wednesday evening at 11 o'clock at night to deliver these tons of food? Because many times when we try and do that, we say, no, we don't take those donations, or it's too late, or you've got to keep it. So there's an enormous amount of barriers to people who want to donate these food sources to the people that we want to give it to. So if you could address that, would be fabulous.
It sounds like there should be an app for that.
They
For
are
someone
developed.
with such a good idea, someone
that
really
they
needs
are
to
developed.
spearhead this.
Well, so actually City Harvest is one of the organizations that cannot take food that has been out on a serving line for the safety reasons, but we will tell people to maybe take it directly to a place like Holy Apostles. Also, just from for us to pick it up, that's a huge, like 14 to 18 foot truck, which doesn't make the most sense from a environmental and many other factors as well. But we will tell, and we have a number of relationships with event planners, and encourage them to say, what are you going to do at the end of your event? You might consider taking it to a kitchen or pantry nearby. And so when in those that we work with for all of our events, that's one thing. But I think maybe including it perhaps in, I'm going to take a guess, perhaps you're an event planner, that at the event say, would that you like to consider that, or maybe call us, we can help you connect to a local kitchen or pantry nearby that could take it.
Well, is there a list
Oh, yeah.
that we can source?
Yes. 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 Yes.
We get those calls all the time, and usually they're directed to City Harvest told us to call you. And we don't turn anything away. We do have timelines, and it has to be delivered to us because we have no transportation. So that is a barrier for us. And we are only there during the day from 6 a.m. to 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and that becomes a problem. I get it.
Can you speak at the microphone, otherwise, madam? Madam.
I'll just repeat that. So the issue is that the events are at night, and you need the food during the day.
I'm sorry to stop the conversation, but it's the end of our panel. I would thank all our panelists. It's been a fantastic, fantastic panel. Thank you, Nevin, for moderating.